Parker J. Palmer said, "Community and individuality are not an either-or choice. They are the poles of another great paradox. A culture of isolated individualism produces mass conformity because people who think they must bear life all alone are too fearful to take the risks of selfhood. But people who know that they are embedded in an internal community are both freed and empowered to become who they were born to be." Those words hold a lot, and I had to read that several times. But what they remind me of is how important it is to belong to a supportive community that allows you to be the person you were meant to be. A community that supports you in your struggles and tribulations, and that grounds you and keeps you honest to yourself, to your loved ones, and to the universe. And it takes work to create that kind of community. We do it here through chalice circles, meadow work, workshops, social justice activities. And today, we're doing it through worship by getting to know one of our members a little bit better. I'm going to welcome Frank Burns to join me by the pool. Yay, Frank! Come join me, Frank. You can. We can dip our feet in the pool here if we feel like it. It is nice and balmy.
Well, I think starting Wednesday we're going to be in the 100-degree plus range. So I think this is going to be full of water, and I'm going to be in it.
So Frank, tell us about yourself and what led you to the UUSMC.
Well, since I'm not a spring chicken, if I tell you everything, it would be a very long story. So I guess I'll try to hit some of the highlights. I grew up in I think it's safe to describe as poor family in Chicago, Irish Catholic. By poor, I mean we got our clothes at church rummage sales. We got day-old bread from the Wander Outlet. We got the USDA cheese, blocks of cheese. We were evicted a few times. Then one of my uncles started doing better. He helped my parents to buy a small house. There were 7 of us, and it was 1,000 square feet. Wow. And it was on the street that bordered the territory of the Latin Kings and the Simon City Royals, which were 2 gangs. So it was the only house that we could get. But that was when I was in my teens. But my mother had grown up as a stepdaughter of a sharecropper in Arkansas during the Depression, and she had only been allowed to go to school for a total of 20 days throughout her entire childhood. Wow. So she really pushed education. So that was really important, and even when my parents couldn't afford almost anything else, at one point they decided to put us into Catholic schools because they were better than the local public schools. And also they had a great deal if you had a big family, because the Archdiocese of Chicago charged full tuition for the first kid, half tuition for the second kid, a quarter tuition for the third kid, and fourth kid was free. And at that time, my parents were conservative Catholic, and I actually entered a high school seminary with the Augustinian Order, which I stayed in for 3¼ years of high school. Had a conflict over religious authority in my senior year, and was told by the principal that the conversations I was having was upsetting the other students, and basically given a gag order, and went and called my parents and said, "I'm coming home." So, and it was in that time when I was a freshman, my freshman year there was a guy who's become relatively well-known who was a senior. His name's Bob Prevost. He's now Pope Leo. So, and then we overlapped. So I decided, I wasn't sure if it was an individual conflict because a new person had taken over as principal of the seminary in my senior year. So I went back and tried again for my freshman year in college at Villanova. I'd gotten, I don't know if I was just curious. That's why I chose the curious why. I don't know that I was like a super hardworking student, but I was really curious and wanted to know. So I got a National Merit Scholarship and other grants and things. And at the time, what they now call a Pell Grant was a Basic Educational Opportunity Grant. That was what it was called at the time. So I went to Villanova. And then in my freshman year, in the seminary still, I realized this was not for me. And I started dating, and maybe the two were related in some way. Not sure there, but probably. And then I was majoring in biology, so I continued with that and in science. And then I went to graduate school at University of Pennsylvania. I got a fellowship from the National Institute of Health for Graduate Studies. And I got a PhD in biochemistry. Then I worked as a medical school professor for about 15 years. And then started with a small biotech startup in Wilmington, which then DuPont ate. So then I became a scientist in central research and development at DuPont. And it was kind of fun because I was in what was called a leveraged service unit. So I could go to any DuPont business. They had at the time anyway, a lot of different businesses. And I could pitch what I wanted to do and like try to sell the project to that business as something they'd want to do. And that was actually easier than getting grant money as a professor.
Right.
And I could also choose things that I was interested in pursuing. So it was a pretty good gig. And then when they merged with Dow, things seemed to get darker. So I wanted out and I left. Started a little company called Bioprimate, which I started right before the pandemic, which was probably not a good move. Because when I say started right before the pandemic, I'm saying 3 or 4 months. So there wasn't even like a year's time, for payroll participation program or protection program. You had to have records of your employees and everything. So I had 4 people working for me that I was able to carry through most of the pandemic. But since then, it's still going on, but it's not big in any way. And it does make a little bit of money, but not, it's not a big deal. Right now, it's me and one part-time person. But I've always been politically active. And when you talk about community, I'll just go back to sort of I'm divorced. My son lives with me. You probably have heard that before. He has treatment-resistant schizophrenia, and he's very awkward socially, so he doesn't like to go out and interact with people a lot. Because people can tell that something's a little off, and people tend to react with fear when they feel that something is off about somebody. So through this journey, I'd given up on Catholicism, was looking for something a little more open-minded, so to speak. So I first went to United Methodist Church for several years, because there, instead of just sort of what the church tells you is true, you're supposed to incorporate tradition, the Bible, and your own noodle, since we have noodles up here, but your own thoughts and your own intelligence. But at some point, I just realized that being tied to even things grounded in a theology or something I really couldn't feel was me. When you say amen at the end of a prayer, you're basically saying you agree. So if there's something, I thought it was very weird to be saying amen to something I really didn't completely believe. So I'd left that, and then I'd become very involved with Extinction Rebellion, which did a lot of street protests for the environment prior to the pandemic. And then when the pandemic hit, that all stopped. And I was looking for something. I started attending virtually services here. And then, when things started, I didn't join. I just sort of, listened in, but was more the observer. And then when things started coming back to in-person meeting here, I came and talked with Steve, who was, a great. He did all the greeting at that time, I think. He also was doing all the hospitality, and I think pretty much all of everything, because it was before a lot of the committees got reestablished and working, and decided to join. And so, and I can say I feel here that I don't have to be dishonest with my conscience in any way. Mm-hmm. I feel I have a community of people who respect that and share that. I feel one of the things that Steve asked me to do, there wasn't a committee at the time, but he had been doing all the hospitality. He asked me if I could take that on, so I've been doing that since. I feel like I contribute here, and I feel I'm supported here, and I feel I can be honest here with myself internally. So.
Thank you. That was a lot to unpack right there.
Well,
I have so many questions.
Go for it.
So you've been a member here and been coming here since like the pandemic, basically.
Yeah.
You did mention a little bit about your political career, so we heard a lot, and I learned all of this. I didn't know any of this. So we're similar in that we have PhDs for biology, biochemistry, right? I never had a startup or anything like that, but I also grew up in a religion where I sought spirituality, but didn't feel like it was honest. It didn't reflect who I was. It didn't offer me anything, and it's kind of what I hear in your story too, where you just couldn't continue on that path. So I'm interested in a little bit about what I know about you is your political career, right? So tell us a little bit about how that weaves into the part of your life that you might also bring here.
Well, I've been always, as a scientist, before I got involved with Extinction Rebellion, I'd always sort of looked at politics as something that someone else could take care of. Like, I was doing my thing to try to, expand knowledge, try to make the world better, do whatever, and politics. But then when I saw what was happening, especially with the first Trump administration coming in, I was working for DuPont. I was making fairly decent money, and I'd done some scuba diving, and I had some wetsuits and things. And then when the protesters at the Standing Rock Indian Reservation were trying to stop an oil pipeline from coming through, got hosed down in below freezing weather, I took vacation, packed up my wetsuits, drove out to North Dakota to give my wetsuits to the people who were on the front lines, and then ended up staying for a couple weeks, building shelters for people who were staying through the winter. And that was sort of my, it's when I stopped being I'll donate to a cause and worry about other people, and just decided, and that's when I started getting involved with Extinction Rebellion and doing a lot of street protests and things. But my local state representative was a Republican who voted against anything climate related, but also voted against a woman's right to choose, voted against many of the things I really lived in. He'd been in office for 14 years at the time, and he was running unopposed. He was also a very big pro-gun, pro-NRA guy, and I was trying to find someone to run against him, but he was going to be unchallenged. This was in 2022. And I couldn't find anyone to run against him, and it wasn't just me, other people were talking to him, but he was seen as unassailable because he showed up at all the community events. He owned some health clubs and pools, and had coached swimming for years, for decades actually, and had all these community connections, and was seen as no one can beat him, it's not worth the effort. And the filing deadline to run for office was mid-July. And on the 4th of July, he and another Republican representative, Mike Smith from the 22nd, were hosting the Hockessin 4th of July parade. And, I grew up in Chicago, and outside my hometown, about 30 miles outside, there was a small suburban 4th of July parade, much like the one in Hockessin. And someone got up on the roof of his store and opened up on the crowd with an AK-type weapon and killed a lot of people. And so I decided that day that if no one filed to run against him, I was going to run against him. So 2 days before the deadline, no one had filed, so I went and filed to run. And I really didn't think I was going to win or come close or anything. I just didn't want this guy's voting record down in Dover to be ignored by all the constituents, because all they knew was he was this nice guy that showed up for community events and he's a very personable guy. And that's how he was holding on to his seat. So I decided to run against him. I filed 2 days before the deadline. And so that was mid-July, and the election was in November. I'd never run a political campaign, I'd volunteered phone banking for Obama or something, but I hadn't been like a real, And I will say this, I'm not a fan of political parties in general. Just I think they're usually about maintaining or getting power. I was really disappointed when the big banks got bailed out in 2008 with the housing bubble, but the people who had the mortgages were not. They could have made the people who had the mortgages whole, and then the banks would have gotten paid and everyone would have been good. But the common people got cut out of the equation. And so I'm cynical about politics and politicians, so you can be cynical about me. I expect that. But anyway, so I went and I worked hard in that time because I thought I was, at least exposing what his voting record was, which had largely been ignored. And then on election day, they wouldn't call the election because it was within 30 votes, which was less than half of 1%, so it went to an automatic recount. On the recount, he ended up winning by 40 votes. So then I decided, well, this guy needs to really go, and if I organize and get going sooner, I'll be able to oust him. So I did. And then after I declared that I was running for the seat again, he decided not to run again for that seat, and he ran as a Republican candidate for governor. And so that's how I ended up in politics.
All right, so it's very recent that you ended up in politics. I had no idea about that. Well, thank you for sharing. I want to bring it back to this organization and ask you, so once you decided to become a member after the pandemic, what is it that made you stay?
It was people. I mean, really, it's the people here and interacting with people, and a sense of being at peace with not feeling I needed to either utter something I didn't completely believe or affirm something I didn't truly feel was there. And I hope you all know this, you're a bunch of really great people. So, yeah. There was I will admit, I'm not like, I like the meadow, but I'm not out there working Wednesday afternoons. Like once in a while I help trim the pear trees or something, but I'm not, I guess I must really like making coffee.
And I hear you're good at it too. So we ran out of coffee today, I heard.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we had enough for like 3/4 of a pot. I hope it's not too weak. But one of the things is, remember, if you want someone to keep doing something, you tell them how good they are at it. So I take those things about I make the coffee well with a grain of salt.
So if you had one wish for this organization, for the UUSMC, could you share what that would be?
Yeah, I really hope that that this congregation does more internally to grow. It seems to be doing more, I think, with our new minister, Reverend Christie. We're doing some things that are different, and some people won't like any change. One of the things you realize is that people aren't going to agree on 100% on anything. But I hope we continue to grow. I certainly do not want to see this turn into some mega church. I think there is a size that's...
Why not?
Well, I don't know. I think it would be tough for the tech crew to have to do the whole Crystal Cathedral kind of setup. But
we would need more parking.
Yeah. So I just, there is some size that we need a little bit bigger for financial stability and things. But I also hope that we do have a settled minister in the not too distant future. And I think one of the things that made it easier when I joined was that Pastor Greg had been here, and it was just sort of people felt a level of comfort that I think comes with someone, who's sort of permanent. So that's my hope. And I hope I'm still a part of it. So that's
right. And we're better for it. And we appreciate that you wanted to share with us today. Would you feel comfortable answering questions from anybody in the congregation? We have a few minutes.
Sure, absolutely.
Is there anybody who would like to ask Frank any questions? Judy. We don't have a mic. Well, we have a Joyce and Sorrow's mic.
Would you be willing to share some of your personal beliefs on the universe, the divinity of the world, God, however you frame that?
Yes.
Thank you, Judy. Very good question.
Okay, so I think for myself, and it's sort of interesting because I think this is something people dealt with as you get older, as you start thinking more about things rather than just, going with what you heard growing up. When you look at suffering and death and things like that, and how trying to make that fit with a model of an interventionist God, it just starts to fall apart. And, I went a different route than St. Augustine, who basically tried to figure out how did this pain and suffering come into the world? Why would God have made such a thing? And he's the one who sort of started promulgating the idea of original sin. So the first 300 years of Christianity or so, into the 400s, this concept of original sin and fall from grace didn't exist, but that was how Augustine dealt with trying to understand suffering and everything in the world. But I just, that was his take, not mine. I also, being a scientist, I used to do work on multiple sclerosis, and we had lab animals that we did testing on. Now, I provided them their food. We cleaned their cages. We did all this kind of thing. So I'm thinking, well, a mouse might think I'm God because I'm doing all this stuff for it, but I'm not doing this for the mouse. I'm doing this, and that mouse is going to die because they're being used in an experiment. So the idea that somehow we can't understand God's plan because it's greater than us, to try to get out from under the suffering and death type of thing, just didn't work for me. I don't think there's an interventionist God. I think there is some seed of goodness that's planted in us and in all people that we need to get to nourish and help grow. Whether you feel that seed comes from a divine entity, or whether you think it's something that evolved because as cooperative species, that's what we're supposed to do to survive in the world, it really doesn't matter to me. And I can't imagine any loving God expecting people to praise him. What kind of narcissist would do that? So I'm just being serious. I don't, like, would I expect those mice in the cage to praise me because I'm feeding them for my whatever purpose? So I don't, that's why I'm not in a more traditional kind of
Right.
Christian tradition right now.
So, so it's the community that matters more.
Well, it's the community and the ideals. I can look at all those principles,
Right.
and I know that I believe in every single one of them,
Right.
and that those are things that are, whatever you believe about God or whatever your theology is, those are things that we all can believe in and work for and know that we're doing the right thing.
All right. Thank you.